Does Jacory Croskey-Merritt fit the bill of a player you're taking in the 7th or 8th round? That more this week on the couch. Jason Wood, one of my heroes here this week. You keep us honest. Keep us honest about Jacory Croskey-Merritt.
It's interesting, Sig, because I think what we have going on with everybody's affectionately known as Bill is an interesting dichotomy we often have behind the scenes between projections that we do for the site, right, which power many things our customers use, and then draft rankings, i.e., the staff who don't provide projections but just rank. And I think we're up against that with Croskey-Merritt, because try as I might, and I fully acknowledge the upside case for why you would want to take him in the 7th or 8th and why you're probably recommending that people do. I get that fully. Like, I totally get if you're on the clock and you're looking at the list of running backs left, he's likely the last person you're seeing on that list that you say to yourself, he could very much be an every week starter for me if things fall right. So I get that. And so logically speaking, I have no like significant compunctions with someone pulling the trigger in the 8th round. But if you look at our site's projections, you'll see that I have him ranked, I think, in 0.5 PPR, running back 44. So, a couple rounds beyond that. And it's just because, when you're doing projections, you really have to kind of take the juicy fat part of the distribution curve of outcomes. And when I look at the situation objectively, I wrote pieces, 4 pieces this preseason about draft capital mattering, right? And again, we get so caught up as the preseason wears on at the excitement of these young players, and understandably so, because they're the juice, they're the things that they're the future stars, the people that will someday be drafting in the first round when they hit. But the track record, to say the track record for draft prospects in the late rounds is bad at running back would be an absolute understatement. It just almost never happens. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I took a look at the last 10 years of draft outcomes, and there were 34 running backs taken in the 7th round over those last 10 years. Only one of them made it into the top 36 at the year end. None made it into the top 24, and none made it in the top 12. Now, I know what you're saying. You're saying, okay, but there are exceptions to every rule, and obviously Merritt was a star from day one of camp if you follow the beat, and obviously they traded their incumbent starter, and it sure looks like he's the starter, and I don't disagree with any of that. So maybe he is another exception, the other one being Isaiah Pacheco. But even then, that exception likely means he's going to give you RB3, rotational RB2 value in good weeks. And so I just can't quite get as excited as many of you are, even though I understand it.
Okay, good. This is going to be really good for jumping off to a big picture thing, which really might just come down to like our outlooks on life, Jason. But
Sure.
I mean, but we're on the couch because I'm going to bring up a couple of other names because I think first of all, 7th round is maybe a little bit narrow. I think we can include a name like Alfred Morris in this discussion. I think we can include also undrafted players like Philip Lindsay in this discussion.
Sure.
So it's not unprecedented, okay? But let's get down to like an analytical methodology. All right, when we're comparing Croskey-Merritt to all 7th round running backs, we at a certain point, like once we have some data, like one camp's worth of data, we can separate these out into apples and oranges and strawberries and cantaloupes, and rotten lemons, So, I don't even know if he has a cohort of a 7th round running back who was rested in the last preseason game and had the player that was ahead of him on the depth chart traded before that game. That's a group of 1, right?
Sure.
So now, to me, that's almost like the universe telling you, like, outlier potential, like, don't let your imagination limit what could happen here because we're already off the reservation. We're already off, like, the map of what can happen in a player's career.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I this is the whole out, and I think Mike Clay, I was, I say death taxes and Mike Clay, he's incredible. I think he was a C, was he a CFO? He's like accountants do it by the book. And I think that, and I don't want to put words in his mouth or try to encapsulate all the work and all the incredible methodology he's created like on his own. but you can stack like 55-45 bets in fantasy football, and it works. Baby, it works. But I like looking for the black swan, right? Like I like
You do. That is your thing, yes.
And I do think that when we look back on how fantasy leagues play out, like often it's those players who picked those players up or drafted them, who bought into the hype, that end up being the big, like, there's a question as I go through rankings and drafts, Jason, like, can this player change my season? And I think where the rubber meets the road is, let's talk about like that 7th, 8th round range where you have to take Bill, because it'd be like Tony Pollard, who may not be there anymore now that Spears is on IR. I guess Tyrone Tracy. You mentioned Isaiah Pacheco. That's another interesting. Maybe DeAndre Swift is I think Jack Charbonnet is his name. We got to bring up right now. It's like one of the biggest risers in the summer. So when you put him against the context of those other running back names in the 7th or 8th round, does it seem like egregiously there? Is there somebody that's just so compelling in that group that you're like, that's why it's wrong to take him, because this is who you should take?
Much rather have all of the names you mentioned, for two reasons. One, they've all done it. We've seen them do it on the NFL field already. I think one of the big disconnects as we've been having this debate over the last few months among our staff and our readers since I published these is this idea of, yes, but this player came on, in week 4 and helped me win my league. That is all true. Remember, what we're talking about right now is, at least what I'm talking about, is draft strategy. And I think one of the things that we kind of forget when we do these August push chats is that a lot of the players we draft are going to get cut early in the season and rotated out.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these later names that we love to talk about, even if they were drafted, the teams that use them to win their leagues weren't the people that drafted them,
right?
Because they got an injury, they got a bye week, and so sure, if the player breaks off in week 1 and you have them, you're going to feel great. But I remember you and I were, I think, doing a podcast years ago just to date us, a week or two after Anquan Boldin had that crazy first game of his career, and the truth is nobody drafted Anquan Boldin, but then he had that game and we all picked him up and he helped us win our leagues, right? So I'm just saying that, like, to me, when you're doing leagues with other able-minded people, it really is about playing the odds. And so for me, just to kind of bring it back to Bill specifically, you could have me over the edge on everything you said. You're right, he could be the one of one, except for the other things are, yes, they got rid of the guy in front of him, but they still have Austin Eckler. And I don't know why you keep Austin Eckler at his age and his contract if you don't fully plan for him to be the third down back. And you have Coach Quinn at least saying publicly, now I will grant you what we saw in the last preseason game somewhat negates what he said, but he did say he sees Chris Rodriguez as the goal line back. Now, I will, for the sake of this conversation, say let's put that to the side and say that's all coach speak. He's not the goal line back. We still have the Eckler issue. And so you have a guy who almost certainly will play third downs. And then on top of that, Jaden Daniels, amazing that he is, because of the way he plays the game, and at least based on the 1 year we have of his, he doesn't check down to running backs. He targeted running backs less than 80 times last year. And I don't know why that would be different, because he's going to take off and run. We saw that in the preseason game, right? The one drive he had, he ran for the touchdown and didn't slide. And it's just, he says, hey, I play my own game. That's what I do. So I just think at best, Croskey-Merritt is a 2-down player. And so then you have to say to yourself, okay, is he going to get the 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns that Robinson got last year to make him viable as an RB3? And that's certainly possible. As I said, that's absolutely the way things could play out. But then you still have Rodriguez and you still have Jaden Daniels also, who are going to run for touchdowns. So it's just hard for me to see where he unlocks the upside.
No, you're right. It's like if you run 10,000 simulations of the season, and at least
a Monte Carlo simulation for me of Croskey-Merritt, there's like 10 outcomes where he's an RB2 or better.
Right. It's like 80%, 90% likely that even that Chris Rodriguez or even Jeremy McNichols, and Jeremy McNichols is at least at this moment is still on the roster, and he's a Swiss Army knife kind of back for them that they trust. I mean, he's actually a veteran back at this point in his career, and it wouldn't be that outlandish for them to use all 4 running backs, and it's just an unpredictable mess. And every now and then on like we saw in the preseason, like a well-blocked play. He can break off a long run, but he's not actually a season changer. And it takes some other intervening event for that to happen. At least it is Washington's offense, which is, a somewhat rich environment. Okay, let's turn the page, get some more, analysis, and then I'm walking down narrative street. And certainly, when I look down narrative street at Travis Kelce, it's dark. Like, I don't want to go down that alley. But I mean, he just got married. Maybe he's feeling like a young man again. I'm sorry, married. He just got engaged to be married. So he's feeling like a young man again. So what puts us on opposite sides of Travis Kelce?
I'll tell you what, I have never felt more out of consensus at a position maybe in all the years. I mean, we're going on 25 years of doing this now for football guys, as I do this year with some of the tight ends that I like. Like the two tight ends I seemingly most want to pull the trigger on when they're up on my board are Travis Kelce and Kyle Pitts, which is just a bananas for me, especially because I was an anti-Pitts person every year until this year. But to your point on Kelce, it's funny because you and I, as much as we love each other, and I think we agree like 95% of the time, where we disagree is usually because you go crazy for narrative street, and many times it works out, and I just don't think that way. Mm-hmm. And then I go into the playing the probabilities, and that's like a boring, tedious way to look at it for you. So it's interesting because to me, the reason I love Kelce is pure narrative.
Oh, wow.
I fully acknowledge that he's well past the normal age cliff. He's coming off, a disappointing season in almost any way that you measure it. The Chiefs obviously are now 2 years into a very different, less potent offensive makeup. But I have totally talked myself into the Chiefs being back to dominant offensively this year. So it's all kind of part and parcel. It's not just Kelce. I'm also, I think, one of the highest on Mahomes at sixth. And part of it is number one, I do believe that they are legitimately frustrated and angry at the way that they got absolutely boat raced by my beloved Eagles in the Super Bowl. I believe that's fired them up. I've heard that Mahomes doesn't have a dad bod anymore. He's kind of refocused. I believe Kelce was absolutely distracted by the Taylor Swift and TV show and podcast and all that stuff. I just don't know that you can devote that much time to those kinds of outside activities at that age, and it's easy for you to lose focus. And as we know in the NFL, 10% less fitness and focus is a pretty dramatic drop off in your performance. I think he's locked back in. And then I think most importantly is a youngster by the name of Josh Simmons, right? I think if we track camp in the maniacal way that we both do, there are a few players that have been as universally praised. Oh, he's a dude. He's going to change everything, as what we have seen from Simmons from snap one of mini camps through, this week. By all accounts, he stepped into the starting left tackle job and has been absolutely dominant. Looks like a seasoned pro. And I think that if the Chiefs' offensive line is back to where it was 3 seasons ago and before that, I think all of this gets back unlocked. So I'm just buying into the narrative that this is sort of a, hey, don't forget about us season. And if you look back at, Tom Brady's career and some of the other greats, but Brady most specifically, because that's who I think Mahomes is chasing at this point. We forget that after Brady had the 50 touchdown undefeated regular season, with the Randy Moss hookup, he tore his ACL the next year, didn't play. And then, he had a few years there where he was up and down. His touchdown rate was all over the place from 7%, which is incredible, to 4%, which is very pedestrian. But you look, and then there was they hit their stride again, and then bam, 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 a string of number one offenses. And I don't see why at Mahomes' age and with that team's makeup that they aren't capable of stepping back into that elite mode. And if they do, I think Kelce's easily a top 5 tight end.
Yeah. And that was, that was practically right from my printing press of, you start with a narrative. No, it's perfect. It's after my own heart, that let's start with the narrative, which is like vibes or 30,000 foot view. And then let's figure out how to distill that down to actionable fantasy advice. And absolutely, one of the scenarios in your simulation should be exactly what you're saying, like revenge tour, Josh Simmons. And since you mentioned your Eagles, by the way, the same thing's happening with the Eagles. They got Jahad Campbell. He was supposed to not be ready. He looks ready. These are both guys that should have been top 10 picks.
Absolutely.
And then the Super Bowl teams got them. So the rich get richer. It's the United States national pastime, right? The rich get richer. And Simmons could be the most impactful rookie this year, period. More impactful than Cam Ward or Travis Hunter, Will Campbell, or any of those guys, because of what it could do to unlock the downfield passing game. And you're right. I mean, Kelce bounces back both. He's basically admitted he was distracted last year, that he wasn't really focused on football the same way he had been in the past. And he's saying he is now, which kind of erases the image. At the end of the Super Bowl, he looked like a guy that was going to retire.
For sure.
And maybe that's, the Rocky, speaking of Philadelphia, the narrative for him to come back and try to regain, for one last act of his career, and then he just gets easy touchdowns. He doesn't even have to actually regain his form. If they just get back to that level, then Kelce's a value at the lowest price he's been since, third year of his career or something.
Right. But you're not buying it though, so I want to hear why.
Well, I think it's just because last year, the last time I saw him, with the exception of when they had no other targets, there were times down the stretch doing projections every week, Jason. I couldn't even necessarily say, am I recommending him over Noah Gray? Am I even saying he's the best Kansas City tight end to play this week? And I guess that stuck with me. And sure, he's coming back and he's slimmed down and he's more focused on football. But I've gotten burned, and maybe this is me or on the couch, projecting this onto situations where I expect something to reverse, for it to not just accelerate or decelerate, but reverse. But at the same time, the Kansas City revenge narrative is a compelling one. What I'm going to toss it back to you with, instead of milking more out of this Kelce thing, is when I look at the wide receivers, because let's say, okay, fine, I'm going to target Kelce. But if it's really the revenge toward Chiefs, there's got to be at least one or two W's among the receivers. But even among what are we talking about here? 1, 2, 3, even you get Jalen Royals in there, like 4 names that we have to think about with Kansas City. I look at this, Woodrow, and I see anything from Xavier Worthy is the new Tyreek Hill to the Chiefs trade for Tyreek Hill in October.
Right. I don't disagree with you. As someone who has to do projections, I go live, as you know, a week after the Super Bowl. So a lot changes, right? I have to make a lot of guesses then. We're still guessing now, and it's end of August. But I'm saying, so obviously in February, it's a lot of guesses, including who's going to be on what team and what free agents are going to be worth. I can't tell you with any great confidence that I see how this receiver core totally plays out. And part of it is just availability, right? It seems like whether it's just bad luck or just a front office perspective in terms of treating injuries a certain way, the Chiefs just never have the same receiving core week to week, or haven't, at least in recent years since Tyreek Hill left. I think a lot of this, Sig, comes down to what happens with Rashee Rice. Right? Like, I think that if you were to tell me that Rice had escaped suspension and was going to, as likely to play 16, 17 games as anyone, he would be my top pick for sure. And he'd be a top 20 receiver for me. But as we sit here now, unless I've missed an update, it looks like, we're still waiting for the league to decide, but we know that we're asking for double-digit games. I think we're also assuming he won't get double digits, but even if it's 6 or 8, then it becomes hard to not only project him or figure out where to draft him, but also then flow that through, because those targets are going to go elsewhere in the meantime. And so I'm left with just sort of buying into youth and talent, which is Xavier Worthy. To me, he's the one receiver on the roster outside of the rookies who we haven't seen yet that we know can be a game breaker if the dominoes fall in a certain way. So I'm pretty comfortable, and I've been more than happy to draft him as my wide receiver 2, a great wide receiver 3, depending on how your build goes. And I'm betting on that. But again, part of that is absolutely assuming that Rice is gone for 6+ games.
And the Rice situation, Drew Davenport, by the way, great. He's finding that, dare I say, taking the art of the intersection of legal issues and fantasy football to Gene Bramall levels. And the way I understand it, I think Adam Schefter, per Schefter, the league maybe was asking for 8. Originally it was put out there, it was double digits. So he said 8, and the Rice side wanted 4. So there was no decision. That's why it got kicked to the date in season. But at some point, Rice's camp could decide, what, we could get 8 at the hearing. Maybe we can get an offer here, 5, 6. So it's
Yeah.
possible it could get resolved at any point before that late September hearing. And I think you have to project Rice missing 5 games. And now it could be in the middle of the season, it could be the beginning of the season, which makes a difference because something you were talking about earlier with Bill makes me think too. This year, more than past years, Jason, if I'm adjusting my process and my rankings,
Mm-hmm.
it is to really ding players that have a cloud of uncertainty around like September, whether
Sure.
like Jordan Addison's suspension or any number of guys like Najee Harris, Tyjae Spears. Like I don't even know if I want to draft them honestly, because you're what are you even going to get out of the gate? And then you're missing opportunities on the waiver wire week 2, week 3 when we're reacting to all the new information.
You're exactly right. You're sitting there with them. They're dead weight. You know they're dead weight. So you have to make the decision then. Why did I bother drafting them in the first place? Because I'm going to cut them and pick up somebody that I like. Or, man, I really drafted them. Ergo, I don't want to cut them, and you're frozen and you can't pick up. And I think we both agree, Sigmund, like the first few weeks of the waiver wire are the gold, and of course there are always exceptions. But I mean, that's where we're going to wake up because we are wrong a lot, no matter how much we do this. We're going to wake up those first few weeks and say, wow, we were completely wrong about players X, Y, and Z. And I need to break my bank to get this player because he's going to totally reshape my roster. And the last thing you ever want to do is have players just sitting like zombies on your bench and you just don't know what to do. And you just feel like you have to hold on to them. Yeah.
Right. And that's the danger of taking certain players early, Luther Burden. Let's say you take him at the 11th round.
Perfect example. I'm totally off. I'm totally out on Burden because to my mind, if the beat writers are telling me that you can't beat out Olamide Zacchaeus for the third spot, I'm not saying the Burden will be a great pro someday, but I to your point, I don't see it happening in September.
It's a very narrow path to walk with the rookies, and I think best ball mentality has skewed this a little bit because the rookies that do hit, especially hit in the second half of the season, so it weights their value. But but from a redraft lineup setting league perspective, when you draft these rookies, you're drafting because of the potential delayed gratification of something that happens. I remember that year with David Johnson, where it's like, what is it, week 12 or week 13 that Bruce Arians is finally like, okay, kid, like you've earned it. Even though we were watching him every week saying like, he's the best running back they have. So you can get caught in, and of course, I think Johnson paid off that year if you did hold him for all 12 weeks. So maybe I'm making the opposite point that I'm trying to make. But rookies, can be a nightmare or a dream, and you have to pick them carefully. Like Kyle Monangai, I think, is a good example of a rookie who have an early reveal. You're going to see in the first week or two what you have with him. And unlike Jacory Croskey-Merritt, you didn't spend a 7th or 8th round pick, because that's, to your point about Croskey-Merritt, if he's a dud the first week or two, you're like, but look at this pick that I spent on him. I can't release him for Brashard Smith, who was playing the Jerick McKinnon role in Kansas City or something like that, and you get stuck. But the larger point, which I think is really fun, let's go off into like, theoretical land. Maybe the worst kept secret in fantasy football that you have already brought up twice, and maybe one of the keys to rethinking fantasy football in a way that can lead to we emphasize the draft so much, as it should be, but I've been saying for a while, it's that first 2 or 3 weeks and making the right reactions, the valid reactions to the new information before you have evidence that that's what's really going to happen. Like you just have a little bit of evidence, you get like one peek, they close the door, and you're like, I have to act now. And a lot of people will say, well, I need more evidence before I act decisively. And when you can pick the situations where you need to act decisively, even though you only have 1 week of evidence or maybe 2 weeks of evidence. But what's that all based on, Woodrow? We're so wrong so often.
Right.
I mean, we're kind of like baseball players that are patting themselves on the back for a 300 average these days, like 280. Right. If we're just like 53% or 55%, we're like, we did great. That's failing in school, son. And incorporating into your process that like we're all, especially yourself, your own calls in your draft are going to be wrong. Probably like 40% or more you're going to be very, very wrong. I'm not, like, I always compare it to the offensive lineman who recovers the fumble because they got beat. So they're watching the quarterback get creamed, but their awareness, and I think that awareness is really the biggest edge, untapped edge in fantasy football.
Absolutely. I mean, you know what I do for my day job, my shoot job, as they say, and generally speaking, humans hate variance. They hate volatility, and I'm being general. I mean, there's a spectrum of humanity, but in general, most people view volatility and uncertainty as risk, and people are generally risk averse. And again, I'm speaking in broad generalizations for an 8 billion per sample cohort, right? But but what's interesting is when you get into fantasy sports and adjacent things like, say, gambling, generally speaking, lots more people that do those things love variance and variability. And I think one of the reasons that football is the most popular by far, fantasy football versus the other fantasy sports, even baseball, which is far older, is because of that variance, right? Outcomes are far from defined, even if we spend 40 hours a week trying to think of them through. And that's really maddening for people like you and I who have to put our thoughts out there for every player every week and live and die by those recommendations. But ultimately, though, that I think is the allure. That is why people keep playing and coming back. You just never know, right? It's you could be 0-4 in your league and then come back and win your league. You could be 6-0 in your league and lose your league, right? It's you got the Patriots 16. The year that the Patriots were 16-0, I was also undefeated in one of my biggest, longest running local leagues, and I too lost in the playoffs. So it's like these kinds of things leave their mark, and they keep us coming back because you just never know. And we all remember the upside outcomes of like when variance goes our way more, fortunately, than we remember when it doesn't. And yeah, to your point, I mean, that's really our job, right? Like if it sounds ridiculous to some that maybe are listening, but if we're right 55% of our calls this year, we're going to A, have a lot of really happy subscribers, and B, we're going to probably think we had a great year as analysts, right?
Well, and it's particularly, and we need to innovate this. There's probably like 20 players, Woodrow. There's like, tell me what your calls were on these 20 players.
Absolutely.
And if you were like 60% on those 20 players, people that listened to you made the playoffs and won some league.
I'll give you two perfect examples from last season, right? So Christian McCaffrey, right? Far and away, runaway consensus first overall player. I had him first overall pretty much all preseason. Certainly our staff, it's a large, smart group of people. We had plenty of debate. Hey, what about his injury? Hey, are we sure he should be number one? As every other one of our competitors and colleagues in the industry did. I think, though, most of us collectively didn't budge. Oh, he'll be fine. That they're not concerned. It's Christian McCaffrey. And obviously, he was, from a ROI perspective, one of the worst investments ever because he was the consensus first overall pick and he was effectively a zero for those teams. And as we did the postmortem, I think Dan Hendry wrote an article about it. Teams that drafted McCaffrey had a horrible year. It was very hard to make up for that missed pick because it was a total zero. And you had to hold on to him. You held on to him.
Exactly.
So, right. So that's an example, though, where because it was a collective mistake, we don't get really in trouble for that. Right. Like, sure, in the moment, people are upset, but like most of our subscribers would have drafted McCaffrey, whether we had him one or not. And because everyone else did too, it's like, okay, yeah, terrible outcome, but we get it. Then let's flip to Saquon Barkley, my team's obviously offensive star. Now, you know me, I'm not a homer. In fact, I generally am tougher on the Eagles, probably for that reason than I am, overly optimistic. But I was a major outlier last year in pounding the table on Barkley because to me it was like, look at what he's done in his career, and now he's going to the best offensive line in football on a team that's going to run the ball. And it was really that simple, and it worked out, right? And I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but I'm saying that because a lot of other really smart colleagues of ours and analysts were out there saying that they were concerned about Barkley and didn't want to take him until the second round and sort of were willing to pass up on him, we got a lot of credit as a site for pounding the table on Barkley, right? Both of those calls were the same person making the same call using the same data and analytical process. It just one was out of consensus, one was consensus, and so we get more benefit, or if it hadn't worked out, blame for the out of consensus call, right? If Barkley had been a total bust in Philly, I would have gotten tons of mail, and Joe would have said, "Hey, buddy, people are pretty upset about your Barkley call there," right? So it's just one of those things where I think it comes down to your point: do we get the most memorable calls each year, right or not? And that guides how people think we did in terms of providing them service.
and then perception and reality, because Saquon Barkley was that important. A couple of things you said that I think are worth doubling back to and examining.
Mm-hmm.
In both cases, I think again it's about imagination. Are you allowing yourself to imagine the worst case scenario for McCaffrey, right? That they're not just being conservative, but the fact that he hasn't even been able to test his injury is a sign that they're not telling us how severe it actually is. With Barkley, it was like you said. I mean, we know he's a supreme physical talent, and he's in a dysfunctional offense, a dysfunctional organization. What can he do in a very functional offense, very functional organization behind a great offensive line? Can you imagine something like that, like one of the greatest running back seasons in NFL history? Right? It's the things that, in hindsight, you talk about superlatives, but you need to let your mind be flexible, elastic enough to imagine those things. And that's where, when we see the week 1 or week 2 reveal, that it's important to keep that quality about how you're processing it and saying, what does this mean? What's
Mm-hmm.
predictive about this? And you mentioned the idea of consensus. And this is one of those things, I repeat myself so often. I need to just make a book of my Bloomisms, my cliches,
Bloomisms for sure.
because there's so many
Bestseller.
of them. I turned 50 this year, and there's so many of them. And one of the ones I talk about is how, especially when we were doing draft stuff back in the day, Draft Guys, Woodrow, you remember Draft Guys,
Of
and
course.
people be like, "You aren't going to lose your job if you're wrong. Why should I listen to you?" And then, and of course, like, again, because of the line of business you're in, you can understand this from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
That I think that's actually a bad bias. That if you feel like your job is on the line for the decisions you make, then you're going to skew towards defensible decisions, as you said, consensus
Mm-hmm.
decisions. But
See it all the time in NFL front offices.
right, it's the bad organizations. It's the way they think, And again, it is sometimes amplified, as it should be, when you're in that 10%, the voice getting drowned out when the big moment happens, a running back goes down, which running back should we pick up, or something like that. And that's all. I guess that's another layer to it, right? Like, we're still wrong when we're reacting in season to things, so be open to that. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, Woodrow, I've been right about targeting a specific backfield or passing
Mm-hmm.
game, but wrong about the player, wrong about the actual player that's going to blow up because of it. But if I just am aware enough to know that I could have gotten part of it right and part of it wrong, then I can be the first one to react. On that note, we already talked about Luther Burden. I like the Chicago wide receivers make my head hurt when I look at that passing game, and add in Colston Loveland too, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just makes my head hurt. Not to mention it's the new offense. Caleb Williams, like, forecasting how that's going to go early in the season, talking about those fast starts or slow starts. What does your supercomputer, when the ticker tape comes out, what's on there about the Chicago wide receivers?
It's interesting. I think that for me, I guess because I put so much thought into coaching changes every year, and cover that for us, that I do think that there are a couple still undermined arbitrage pieces of analysis that we haven't quite, as an industry, locked in yet. I think offensive line is one, right? We've, obviously our own Matt Batanti's great at it, and he's an incredible asset for that reason. But I think predicting offensive line outcomes, and then also how those outcomes flow through to the skill players we draft, is still something that we as an industry can get a lot better at. And I think understanding coaching is another thing. Now, I will couch that by saying, as you know, the NFL is so fickle that we have, on average, the average tenure of an offensive play caller in the NFL is 2 years. And that's, for those listening, that's not hyperbole. It's literally less than 2 years on average that they have their job, because either they get promoted to a head coaching gig or they get fired. So it is hard to with that small of a sample set, to really buy into it. But when we have coaches who have longer sample sets, then I get interested, because coaches do tend to have tendencies. So, long-winded way, Sig, of saying to you, I'm a believer in Ben Johnson. I believe he is, in fact, a difference maker, because I saw him turn the Detroit Lions into the league's best and most efficient and creative offense. And I saw him take Jared Goff, who, of course, was the first overall pick. So I'm not saying he's not a talented player, but Jared Goff was on his way to being a middling to bust outcome first overall pick, and he turned him into, again, one of the league's most productive, steady pocket passers. And, we don't have to, we all know how it went for Ben Johnson's, how he got the job. But so I'm a believer that he will get the Bears offense clicking in a way that we haven't seen from that team in a long, long time. Will it be in September? Will it be this year? That I can't speak to. I have less confidence in that. But for the sake of we have to make a call, I am betting that this year the Bears offense will be significantly improved across the board. And if I'm betting on that and then projecting that out, I see multiple receivers being more than fantasy worthy. I have DJ Moore. I'm over consensus. I believe much higher than you. I believe much higher than some of our peers on DJ Moore. I still see him as someone who's more than capable of a top 24, 25 type of outcome, if not higher. And I'm all in on Rome Odunze. One of my favorite sort of annual investments is to take the post-hype sleepers. The guys that we all just were gaga for, usually as rookies, because of what they did in college and their draft pedigree, and they just didn't quite pan out. And then human nature, the consensus starts fading them, and their ADP falls. And I love coming in the next year and going over the top with it. Odunze fits that bill. Marvin Harrison fits that bill. I'm more excited about Odunze because I'm more excited about Caleb Williams and what he can become. I think we know what Kyler Murray is. But so I'm all in on both Odunze and Moore, and because I'm all in on both of them, I have not been all summer in on Luther Bird, and that was before he had trouble beating out Zacchaeus. So I think those two guys are going to get funneled a ton of targets in this offense. I think they'll be used creatively. They'll both be lined up all over the field, and I'm comfortable taking either as top as top 25, at worst top 30 options.
Yeah, it's funny looking at the early season schedule and forecasting this out because there's three really compelling stories playing out. One of my Bloomisms these days, Woodrow, is the NFL is the great American novel now.
Right.
I mean, even every one of these franchises, right? Like you've got the Raiders. They moved to Las Vegas. Mark Davis is in the shadow of his dad. They've gone through some of these ridiculous decisions like hiring John Gruden, but now they have Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll brought in Chip Kelly, and they brought in Geno Smith, and they drafted Astor-Genti. Like they have an ethos now as a team. Probably it's kind of like the team, the players are. I think this is happening in Chicago too. They're just like structure, like an ethos. Like let's do this. Like let's. I think the players want to be part of something, and they weren't under the previous regimes in Chicago and Las Vegas that they could be part of. So how's that offense going to look? You have Chicago. And this one's been a specific Bloomism of 2025 that Ben Johnson's secret sauce is being a hard ass. That's what we've learned is attention to detail, but attention to detail with a big picture in mind. Now, what's fascinating when we look at the early schedule and by the way, Las Vegas starts out with New England. I'm not sure if New England's defense is like a pushover. They have some talent, a cornerback and up front. And then the Chargers, that's not an easy defense. Maybe Washington, Chicago, but the Chicago picture is really fascinating because they start out with Minnesota. And look, it's going to be the first week in the Ben Johnson offense. I bet you Minnesota could beat them like 33-6 or something. And Caleb Williams could turn the ball over 3 times. It could just be just a nightmare.
Right. People will be dropping them. They draft him as their QB2. They're disgusted. Here we go again. Right. Yep.
And then after that, they get Detroit, Dallas, Las Vegas. And remember, Dallas is missing, some key players in their secondary. And who knows if Micah Parsons is going to be playing. Then they go on a bye, which is actually good in this case because they got 4 games of tape. And they say, okay, we get a breather 4 games into the season to see where we're at, make adjustments. And they come out of the bye with Washington and New Orleans. So, I mean, that's a runway.
That's beautiful.
That's a schedule that builds confidence in Caleb Williams, confidence in the Ben Johnson system. So I think and I still don't know whether to put a chip on Rome Odunze, who seems like he's going to be the number 1. DJ Moore, at least they want to try to get the ball in his hands as many ways as they can. Maybe even DeAndre Swift. Like if we're saying, hey, this offense is going to start well, or at least let's say this: Swift or Monungai, one or the other. You need to be drafting one or the other.
Swift is really interesting, Sig, because I've been way higher on Swift from jump this year, right? And still am. I figured ADP would kind of creep up to where I was from the start on Swift as people kind of started realizing that there was no competition. And it really hasn't quite happened. I mean, the ADP is up a lot from where we were, say, in April, but in terms of the heat of things, it's kind of stayed where it is. He's another one of those backs that I feel like is the last starting back where people are like, well, I guess he's at least a starter. Let me draft him. And I can get that because, again, if we're going to narrative, like, he was obviously on the Lions and they decided he wasn't the guy and they moved on. And I can't imagine that Ben Johnson doesn't have opinions on Swift, but I do find it interesting with that context that they didn't really do anything to displace him. And now I know, again, I know you've brought up Monangai several times, and listen, Monangai is a local kid playing
Seventh
for,
round pick.
yeah, 7th round pick. Former Rutgers, Jersey boy, Don Bosco, a fan of him as a human being and rooting for him. But like, Roshan Johnson's had an absolute dead summer, right? Like every
Yes.
mention is, oh, he doesn't look good or he's hurt. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume that Monangai probably has at least earned the backup role. But that still leaves Swift pretty clearly in the number one seat until he does something to lose that seat. And so again, like if I'm right about Johnson and I think the offensive line has cohesion this year, then I think he could be another value. Like, I'm sort of all in on the Bears.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that gives me pause is that I am blindly buying into the idea that Caleb Williams is an elite talent.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you said about Ben Johnson being a hard ass. Was there a more disgusted head coach coming out of this last week of preseason games than Ben Johnson? Now, admittedly, he's also one of the few that's played his starters, but he couldn't hide his disgust. I mean, he was very frustrated at how poorly they executed. And I'm going to chalk that up to motivation. But yes, I got a little tinge of fear in my mind, the fear worm creeping in, thinking, oh no, what if Caleb is the problem? And then what we're looking at is that the Bears have to start over again in 2026, and Ben Johnson gets his own guy, just like the Lions moved on from Stafford and brought in Goff. So it's like there is a little teeny part of me that's open to that outcome now, which scares me. But I'm so all in on the Bears. I'll live with the outcome at this point because I'm just too invested in. I have everybody over consensus except for maybe Loveland, who I don't dislike either. I just, there's only so many targets to go around, so I don't have him as high as some of you guys.
Yeah, that's one of the, the Great American Novel. Again, Caleb Williams, the first NIL quarterback, nothing to help him last year, except, I guess the very end of the season. But this year, they've built a lot around him. How's he going to take to it? He seems like he's buying into the program.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have to remember in Detroit, and this is, again, what's the implications of all this? Dan Campbell is actually a pretty humble guy because while Ben Johnson's gotten all the credit, Dan Campbell actually was the one who helped triage their offense the year they basically moved on from Anthony Lynn, and Ben Johnson was kind of an interim offensive coordinator. And I think the players really liked him. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I remember, specifically spoke out saying, like, we love him. He cares about what we think,
Right.
But and then Johnny Morton's there. We can talk a little bit about Isaac Tesla. I don't think anybody's moved up my board more spots in the last week. And that's because he was like 250 and now he's like 150.
Right.
But still, what could be the implications of that if Detroit has another downfield target and a red zone target in that offense? So we'll see. Maybe the Lions offense is still great without Ben Johnson, and maybe the Bears offense gain something, but Caleb Williams is that critical point of failure for all of it. And how he takes to the system. Okay, we got like a few minutes before we go off the rails, so I want to make sure to touch on a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Zach Charbonnet earlier in the show. I'm the Seattle running back. It makes me feel. I want to do something. I kind of am wanting to just recommend Zach Charbonnet at this point, but I also know Kenneth Walker in the 4th round can be a league winner. I just don't know what to do with this, but I know should do something with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I know you and I both do sort of end of the preseason, start of the regular season, kind of like this is where we stand on things articles. And mine are generally focused on things that I've changed my mind about from like my earliest projections. And those are coming up later this week. And it's interesting because when I look back at my February projections, I had Charbonnet and Walker effectively dead even. And which obviously was a very out of consensus view. And it was just because as I looked at them, I thought, well, Charbonnet, are we sure that Charbonnet is not a better player on a per snap basis, just in general? And it's a new coaching staff. And so why, like, it's not like they're beholden to Walker, and Walker's obviously had trouble staying healthy. So I was on that mindset and thinking, that's going to be one of my big calls this year, right? Like, fade Walker, draft Charbonnet. Then I guess I kind of got to thinking about a lot of the other people whose opinions I value, such as yours, but many others, and Bob Henry and the like, and kind of came back around to a more consensus view where I thought, well, it seems pretty clear that the organization and the coaches and a lot of other analysts who I respect think Walker is the guy as long as he stays healthy. Maybe I need to back off a little bit on the pedal of the metal with Charbonnet. And then, like you, Sig, I kind of have gone to 360. Now I'm back on the no, Walker really was banged up again this summer, and I know it's all a plan. They have all this plan to manage him, but like workhorse running backs don't need a plan. They just get it done, right? Like the reason Derrick Henry's because he just gets it done. The reason Saquon was great last year is because he just got it done. And I want to draft players who are going to get it done until or if they get hurt. And if Walker's on a maintenance plan in the summer, I mean, why are we thinking he's going to be back to getting, 20 touches a game, even if he's okay? So I'm with you. I think the arbitrage here is Charbonnet is getting drafted along with a litany of other clear-cut number 2 running backs, the break glass in case of emergency starters. And to me, he's proven that he's better than that. So I guess put it in another way, I expect that Charbonnet will be my preferred backup pick. Like the first backup running back I draft, Charbonnet's probably the guy in almost all cases, barring some kind of like weird dislocation where someone just falls that normally wouldn't fall.
So. Yeah. I mean, Charbonnet and Bill Croskey-Merritt are both fun guys to be like that first bench running back you take in the 7th or 8th round. You just take a big old swing for the fences and see what happens. But with Charbonnet, like you said about the other guys in the tier with Bill, he's done it before too. I mean, he actually was more productive in his starts in a fantasy football lens, points in a PPR league than Walker was. And why I'm back in or just so fascinated with the Seattle backfield is it seems like one of the consensus stories out of training camp has been that Clint Kubiak had installed the blankety blank out of a running game in one camp. Like they're getting after it, both in the preseason games and the practices. Like offensive linemen want to block.
It's that classic Kubiak Shanahan zone blocking scheme, right?
So whoever it is, but it sure seems like the narrative street is headed to Zach Charbonnet's house, and to the point where I really wonder, Woodrow. Like I can see in the range of possibilities at some point this year, Charbonnet getting an extension, and it's signifying that Walker's going to free agency next year, and Charbonnet is the guy they see as the guy. Like the first time Walker gets hurt, and then Charbonnet has like 300-yard games in a row,
right?
Then they're like, we just signed him to a 4-year, 48, the same deal James Cook got or whatever, signifying like that's our guy. Like in dynasty leagues, I don't know if people can see like this, like Jack Charbonnet could rocket up the board.
That's a good point.
And then one of the other things I'd like to say too is that we think of changes happening incrementally during the season. Then this is where your other job comes in. No, man, it's like a inflection points. Change doesn't happen incrementally during the NFL season. It's one way, and then in a moment or a game, a week, it flips. It's like a whiplash. And again, if you're slow to react to that, you better draft well, I guess. Anybody else you want to, and like you said, I'm glad you mentioned it. Football guys subscribers, you're going to be hearing a lot from Jason and I and the rest of the staff, but specifically about like, okay, let's take a breath. Preseason's over. Roster cuts have happened. What did we learn in the last month? And now we're ready to go forward. Anything else you want to shout from the rooftops to the people while you're here on the couch?
I have trouble understanding, and this is actually credit to our good buddy Matt Waldman, who I think is the first person I saw make this argument, and actually after I read his argument, I thought, he makes a lot of sense. I'm going to revisit this. I don't know why we all feel like Puka Nacua is a stone cold lock for a top 5 season and Devontae Adams is battling for a top 20 season. I think that, and this summer has given me no reason to think that Waldman wasn't right and that they're both basically co-equals, which means that there'll be weeks where one's the best and awesome and the other weeks where the other is the best and awesome. So my point being, I would not draft Nacua in the first round, and I absolutely would draft Adams in the 3rd every time I could.
Love it.
So I think that's one. Another one, I have to tell you, Sig, I really thought that I had Dallas figured out this year when they had no choice but to hire Brian Schottenheimer as their head coach. I wrote a long article about Brian Schottenheimer and his history, and I thought made a very historically factual driven case as to why Schottenheimer is going to run the hell out of the ball this year. Be damned whether he's effective at it or not. And that was going to mean that Prescott and the passing game are going to really take a hit in terms of their attempt volume, and that you should kind of fade all the Cowboys receivers. Like, I still believe in the analysis and the process, but with what the defense is looking like and the Parsons situation and the fact that honestly, the only people in camp that got any kind of positive buzz were Prescott, Lamb, and Pickens. I think it may be a situation like the year where Schottenheimer had to throw in Seattle, and he just has to throw. So I've softened on all of my Cowboys fades on the passing game, and I'm kind of more consensus with you guys now on that. And that's a late sort of rising thing. And then again, maybe I'm just a sucker for the old heads because I am an old head, but I think Deebo Samuel is a value, and I think Cooper Kupp is a value. I think they are both have given me no reason this summer to think that they aren't going to be major focal points of their new offenses and are healthy exiting camp and are going to be major targets until and if they get hurt. So
yeah,
I'm just team old man this year, I think.
I am too. And I'll add Mike Evans to that list too. I think
it's another good
he's
one.
going to get off to massively. I think Evans or Adams in the third round is a perfectly fine plan. Go to your third round.
If not Kittle. I know that you had Evan on. You said Kittle's an auto pull in the third, and that actually got me back to sort of revisit the Kittle. I think I had Kittle like tight end 5, so I wasn't like fading him, but I went back and I thought, I think you're right. Like I would feel better taking Kittle this year given the team circumstance than I would pulling the trigger on like Hawkinson or Laporta or even McBride at their ADPs. I feel like Kittle's ceiling and floor may both be higher than some of those guys.
Oh yeah, it's not that hard to picture a scenario where Kittle becomes the primary target, at least for a stretch.
Yeah, exactly.
And we already know that it's a highly efficient connection. On the Dallas front, really quick, I'll just say that one of the main reasons apparently they hired Brian Schottenheimer was his relationship with Dak Prescott. I think this is going to be a Dak Prescott offense, and George Pickens feels loved. For the first time in his career, I think he feels loved by the people around him. I think you're going to see him have a big year. And Deebo doesn't have pneumonia. I think it was the pneumonia. From everything I'm seeing from the Washington reports that's Deebo Samuel. And when he came back after the pneumonia, he wasn't himself last year. So if people are watching him saying like, "Yep, that's Deebo," I agree with you. And Cliff's going to feed him a lot of screens. Okay, so abbreviated author has got to talk about this. A trip that you just did. And I like to say gratitude is a vitamin for your soul. But I think awe and wonder are too. And I'm fond of saying lately, Woodrow, like if we were from another planet and someone told you stories about Earth, it would sound more fantastical than Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or whatever. Pick your favorite alternate universe. This blows it away. It's all based on this anyway. But I like to say like New Orleans has one foot in the spirit world, one foot in the physical world, and all kinds of woo stuff like that. But you just got back from Iceland, which is like that place might be the spirit world for the spirits. I don't know that there's maybe like the South Island of New Zealand. I think that's where they filmed Lord of the Rings. A truly awe-inspiring place, and a place like the art and the culture it produces is incredibly fascinating. And I just want to know how it affected you.
It was incredible. Thank you for bringing it up. As you said, I just got back. It actually, as we record here now, it's actually my lovely wife and my 25th wedding anniversary. So happy anniversary, Beth. Love you.
Cheers.
Yes, and we were on the trip for that. It was an amazing trip, man. Neither of us had been there before. We didn't know much about it other than, we knew it was going to be beautiful. One of the main reasons we went specifically was to go whale watching. You know this, but the listeners don't. I'm a massive whale fan. I have a whale tattoo. I'm very much a fan of whales in general, and have had the good fortune of seeing them at different parts of the world. And so that was sort of the start of the impetus for going on the trip, and that worked out beautifully. We got to see some amazing humpbacks and minkies up close. We took an actual like an inflatable raft boat out this time, like instead of one of those big boats, and so we were literally like right next to them. It was pretty cool. Well, more than pretty cool. It was pretty much transcendent, closest thing I've ever had to a religious experience, if I'm being honest. But then, as you alluded, it is an incredible place. First of all, like one of the through lines is just how incredibly resilient the Icelandic people are. I mean, it's this gigantic block of earth that is really hard to live on. It's beautiful, right? But the conditions are incredibly harsh. They have no natural infrastructure, right? No fossil fuels of any kind. It's only a population of 300,000 people, so it's smaller than most of our U.S. states. And yet they've persevered for thousands of years by being just rugged and living off the land and living symbiotically with the land, and figuring out, again, how to do more with less and be really efficient, but yet still loving life. And that just comes through even now. It just comes through in their culture. And then on top of that, tourism is a brand new thing for them. And I learned this while we were there. They've only really tourism has only really been a big thing for them in terms of industry for 20 years, right? For a country that's been around for thousands, and as a people, and you can feel that because Sig, you obviously you live in New Orleans now. You lived for a long time in Austin, which for a long time was like a really great artsy, young, vibrant city. That's how Reykjavik was, man. It was artsy and inclusive and just vibrant, and just everything felt new in terms of like incredible restaurants and incredible bar scene and bookstores and galleries, and just it just felt like one of those cities where people appreciate like all of the things that make life worth living, the arts and just joy. And we were really taken aback by that, and it was so great to see. And then of course the landscape is absurd. I mean, you mentioned Lord of the Rings, but it's like, I mean, I was like, oh, we're in the middle of Westeros right now, or like we're in the Shire. It was just jaw dropping in all ways. And so I just 2 thumbs up. I thought it was incredible. I clocked at least 20 different languages being spoken around me over the course of the week we were there. Of course, everyone also speaks English, which is that's another story. That's about the joys of our imperialistic, everyone speaks English around the world. But the point is when people were speaking their native tongue, I mean, at least 20 languages I heard, which is awesome. It shows you how everyone from around the world wants to come and experience this place. So I just thought it was incredible from start to finish, man. There was nothing about it that I didn't like. And I said, I hope we can get back with our now adult kids at some point if they want to take a trip there.
Yeah. You mentioned Wales too. Like I've been fortunate enough to feel an elephant acknowledge my existence. Just this summer, we went to the Wolf Center out in California and saw some Mexican gray wolves, and you just feel like a sense of namaste, like I'm acknowledging your existence for these great animals, our ancestors, basically. Like everything we learned from Earth. Anyway, and Iceland is, I mean, it's all the geothermal stuff is happening there too. Like,
oh, it's incredible. Like I said, no fossil fuels, and they've got all the modern conveniences, and it's just, again, through willpower. And if anyone ever wants to, I mean, it's probably going to be boring to some of you, but like Google or do a web search as to how one builds like a geothermal heating system for a city. It is arduous, expensive, taxing, dangerous work. And, they did it for their entire country. So
yeah, it's an incredible place. Okay. Last thing, I can't go over an hour because Cecil gets mad at me. So
that's right.
It has to be brief. Again, I'm 50. I was graduated from college in 97, and I've been thinking more and more how lucky we were to be that age in the 90s. Woodrow, you're my contemporary. I mean, all the things were happening everywhere, right? Like Lollapalooza or Fish Tour or the hip hop scene or whatever it was this is pre-internet, whatever it was you were into was actually happening in the world, and you could be part of it. What's the first thing that pops in your head when I say like the greatest thing about being that age in the 90s?
Definitely the concert scene. I mean, you mentioned Lollapalooza. I went to, I think, 6 years straight of Lollapalooza, and I can still remember like they were yesterday. We had tickets to this is going to be a bit sad of an aside. We had tickets to see Nirvana, but right before Cobain took his own life. And I was at the Lollapalooza in Philly when his his then widowed wife Courtney walks up on stage, and admittedly she was out of her mind, high and drunk, but she walked up on stage as Tribe Called Quest was performing, and they stopped their set obviously, and she spoke about Kurt and how much she's going to miss him, and then sort of sang a song in honor of him. And those moments, I'll just never forget those moments of like interacting with other people and being sort of one, and the music felt transcendent. And again, as you know, I'm not religious, but that's very much a spiritual thing for me, music, and that's part of the reason why.
It's the language of the soul, and nobody had a phone out. I'm sorry, I sound like an old man.
That's true. We didn't have
but we were present, and we try to be present with you at Football Guys, especially now at draft season, but all year because you're present with us. You've made this happen, Football Guys. 25 years because of you and because of the OGs, OFBGs, like Jason Wood. So everybody, good luck in your drafts. Get ready to enjoy the season together. We would not want to spend it with anybody but you because you're so classy.